The doctor informed the dog that his owner had passed away, but the animal sensed something unusual and managed to stop the doctor. What happened next with the police officer on the brink of death left everyone in the hospital completely stunned. Lucas Nelson was a highly respected police officer, known for his relentless ability to hunt down criminals. However, his greatest loyalty lay not only with his badge, but also with his faithful companion, Rocky, a German shepherd trained to face the most dangerous situations. The relationship between Lucas and Rocky was more than a simple working alliance. It was a deep and constant bond that manifested in their daily lives. Rocky was always prepared to act at the slightest gesture or word from his owner, while Lucas found an incomparable peace of mind knowing that Rocky was by his side, vigilant and ready to protect him. That sunny afternoon, as they patrolled the bustling city streets, an emergency call shattered their routine. A bank robbery was in progress, and without wasting a second, Lucas and Rocky sped towards the scene, sirens blaring like a warning echo in the wind. Upon arriving, chaos reigned. The criminals were exiting the bank in a stolen car, firing mercilessly at the approaching police officers. Lucas knew there was no margin for error. With a firm voice, he ordered Rocky to get in the car, and thus began a frantic chase through the congested city streets. As Rocky kept his gaze fixed on the criminal's car, Lucas skillfully maneuvered, dodging obstacles and staying close to the fugitives. Adrenaline coursed through his veins as he got closer and closer to his target. The pursuit stretched for several kilometers, with the criminals using all their tricks to escape justice. They planted fake bombs along the way to divert police attention and, in an act of desperation, drove the stolen vehicle towards a crowded market, hoping the crowd would stop their pursuers. Lucas, aware of the danger, had to maintain extreme concentration, using all his skills to avoid the traps and ensure the safety of civilians. With Rocky by his side, he never lost sight of his mission, to stop the criminals at all costs. Despite the risks and reckless maneuvers of the criminals, Lucas and Rocky did not give up. The chase was relentless, and though the criminals showed no signs of surrendering, the duo stood their ground. Finally, in a risky turn of events, the criminals began firing directly at Lucas's vehicle, forcing him to dodge bullets while still in pursuit. The speed and complexity of the moment were such that the vehicles ended up colliding, throwing Lucas and Rocky forward with the force of the impact. Before they could even recover from the blow, the criminals quickly surrounded them and forced them out of the wrecked vehicle. With guns pointed at their heads, Lucas and Rocky were taken hostage. The criminals showed no mercy and threatened to take their lives if they tried anything. Rocky, sensing the imminent danger, began to growl furiously, his eyes flashing with a mixture of anger and fear. However, Lucas, understanding the gravity of the situation, gently rebuked him, telling him to calm down. As the criminals led them away from the crash scene, Rocky remained alert, his muscles tense, ready to act as soon as he saw an opportunity. But when one of the criminals approached with the intention of attacking Lucas, Rocky could no longer contain his instinct. With a formidable roar, the dog lunged at the criminal, his sharp teeth gleaming under the sun. A fierce fight broke out between Rocky and the criminals, while Lucas desperately tried to find a way to escape and call for backup. In the midst of the chaos, while trying to protect his brave companion, Lucas was hit by one of the criminals, who was trying to flee. Gunshots echoed through the streets, reaching a climax of tension and danger. Lucas, determined to capture the criminals, was wounded in the shoulder by a stray bullet, falling to the ground with a cry of pain. The street was filled with an unsettling silence, broken only by the distant echo of the gunshots and the agonizing groan of the criminal's vehicle engine. Lucas's body lay on the asphalt, his wounded shoulder bleeding slowly, as Rocky continued his fierce confrontation with the criminals. The dog's loyalty was unwavering. His only mission at that moment was to protect his master at all costs. The sun shone high, relentless, intensifying the feeling of suffocation and despair. Rocky growled, his sharp teeth seeking any opportunity to injure the attackers, who now backed away, aware that time was running out. Lucas, between a veil of pain and confusion, saw Rocky fighting, and although darkness threatened to consume him, he tried to cling to reality. His mind, clouded by pain, focused on one thing: survival. "Rocky!" Lucas shouted with what little strength he had left, his voice barely a whisper, choked by pain. Rocky, hearing his name, turned for a moment, his dark eyes filled with determination and concern. In that brief second, one of the criminals took advantage of the distraction and pointed his gun at the dog, ready to finish him off. But before the shot could ring out, police sirens erupted onto the scene, the piercing sound reverberating through the empty streets. The criminals, now outnumbered, knew their time was up. With one last hateful glance at Rocky, the criminal lowered his weapon and ran towards the moving car, his companions already in full flight. Rocky, still on guard, stayed by Lucas's side, licking his face urgently, trying to keep him conscious. Lucas's gaze met his dog's, and in that silent exchange, a promise was sealed. They would not give up. The first officer to arrive at the scene, a middle-aged man with a face weathered by years of service, ran towards Lucas. "We need an ambulance here!" he shouted over his radio, as he knelt beside the officer's wounded body. Rocky growled, still protective, but the officer held out a hand cautiously. "Easy, boy. I'm here to help your owner," he murmured softly, keeping his gaze fixed on Rocky's eyes. The dog, though still on alert, recognized the calmness and respect in the officer's tone, allowing him to approach. The atmosphere was thick with tension. As the officer applied pressure to Lucas's wound to stop the bleeding, the street filled with patrol cars and officers securing the perimeter. The echo of the last shot still resonated in everyone's minds, but relief began to settle in when it became clear that the criminals had fled. Lucas, now paler, felt the darkness taking over his vision. "No, don't. Leave me," he murmured with effort, his weak hand searching for Rocky's fur. The dog moved closer, resting his head on his master's chest, his body trembling with a mixture of fear and determination. "We're losing him. Get the stretcher." The paramedic's voice was a bolt of urgency amidst the tense calm. In a matter of seconds, Lucas was carefully lifted and placed on the stretcher. Rocky tried to climb up next to him, but was gently restrained by one of the officers. "Don't worry, boy. We're taking him to the hospital." "You're coming too," the officer said, stroking Rocky's head. The dog, although reluctant, understood and obeyed, staying close to the ambulance as Lucas was loaded into it. As the ambulance sped away, Rocky was escorted by the officer in his patrol car. Throughout the journey, Rocky's eyes never stopped looking in the direction they were taking his owner, his heart pounding with a mixture of terror and hope. The sound of the ambulance faded as Rocky, sitting in the back seat of the patrol car, kept his eyes on the road. The city flashed past the window, but for him, all that mattered was following Lucas's trail. Every beat of his heart was like a hammer pounding his chest, echoing with worry and fear. The city lights reflected in his dark eyes, but his mind was in only one place, with his master. The officer at the wheel looked in the rearview mirror, observing the dog who, despite being in a police car, did not seem to relax. "Easy, boy," he murmured, though he knew his words had no power to calm the anxiety Rocky felt. He had seen that look in police dogs many times, but Rocky's was different. It was more than loyalty. It was a bond so deep that it seemed to transcend the barriers of human and animal communication. Upon arriving at the hospital, the scene was a chaos of lights and movement. The ambulance doors flew open, and the paramedics pulled out the stretcher with Lucas, his face pale and his body still. Rocky jumped out of the patrol car and ran towards the stretcher, but was intercepted by another officer. "No, Rocky, you have to wait here," the man told him, his voice firm but understanding. The dog stopped, though his whole body trembled with the urgency to follow his owner. The minutes that followed were an agony for Rocky. They took him to a waiting room with other officers, but his mind was not in that place. The hospital noises, the hushed conversations, the smell of disinfectant, none of that mattered. There was only one door that mattered, the door that separated him from Lucas. He sat in front of it, refusing to move, his eyes fixed, almost hypnotized, on that barrier he could not cross. Time seemed to stand still. Every second was an eternity, and every minute a silent torment. Rocky did not eat, he did not sleep. He simply remained alert, waiting for any sign, any indication that his owner was okay. Every time someone walked through the door, his ears would perk up and his body would tense. But each time, hope would vanish when it was not Lucas who appeared. Finally, the door creaked open and the doctor came out, his face showing the weariness of the battle fought in the operating room. Rocky immediately got up, getting as close as he could, his eyes filled with a mixture of desperation and hope. The doctor looked at the dog, and then at the officers who were standing, waiting for news. "Lucas is stable, but in a coma," the doctor said, his voice grave but not without a touch of hope. "We did everything we could. Now, we just have to wait." The doctor's words hung in the air like an indefinite sentence. Neither life nor death. Rocky understood in his own way. His owner was alive, but he was not out of danger yet. The officers exchanged glances, aware of the weight of the situation. But Rocky did not see them, did not pay attention to them. His focus was entirely on the doctor, trying to decipher what was not being said with words. "I'm sorry, but you can't go see him yet," the doctor added, seeing the concern in the dog's eyes. "But I promise we'll do our best." Rocky lay down on the cold floor, his eyes fixed on the door, his heart beating with a rhythm that reflected his anxiety. He knew something was wrong. He felt it in the depths of his being, but he had no choice but to wait, and that wait was a silent hell. For the next few days, Rocky kept his vigil, refusing to move from his spot in front of the door. The officers tried to take him somewhere else, to feed him, but he refused. Every time they opened the door, he would lift his head, his eyes shining with the hope that it would be Lucas who appeared, but each time he was left with nothing but disappointment. The hours turned into days, and the days into an endless fog of anxiety and pain. Rocky began to show signs of exhaustion, but his determination did not waver. When they finally allowed him to approach Lucas' bed, Rocky walked with a mixture of relief and fear. His master's body lay still, connected to machines that emitted rhythmic beeps. And though Rocky did not understand those sounds, he knew that each one was vital. Carefully, Rocky climbed onto the bed, approaching Lucas's arm. He sniffed it delicately, licking his hand softly, as if with each lick he could bring him back to life. The doctors watched from the doorway, silently, not daring to intervene in that intimate moment. Time, for an instant, seemed to stand still, and in that small gesture, Rocky conveyed all the hope and love he carried inside. He stayed there, next to Lucas, in silence, his warm body next to the cold metal of the bed. Every movement was a whisper, every breath a silent prayer. Time moved slowly. But for Rocky, there was only one goal: to be there when Lucas opened his eyes. Night had fallen over the hospital, enveloping the building in a cloak of silence, interrupted only by the faint sounds of the machines keeping Lucas alive. The hallway was deserted, lit by the cold fluorescent light that made everything seem more dismal, more hopeless. The murmurs of the doctors and nurses were soft, as if they did not want to disturb the delicate balance between life and death that reigned in that room. Rocky, exhausted but unyielding, had not moved from his spot beside Lucas's bed. His dark eyes, bright with a mixture of sadness and determination, followed every movement, every change in the rhythm of his master's breathing. He could feel the tension in the air, the weight of fate hanging over them like a sharp sword. Suddenly, in the midst of that somber silence, Lucas's body shook violently. Rocky rose immediately, his senses alert, but not knowing exactly what was happening. Lucas began to convulse, his muscles stiff and his face contorted in a grimace of pain. The monitoring machine emitted a sharp, alarming beep that shattered the silence of the night. The sound was so loud that it seemed to tear through the tense quiet of the hospital. In a matter of seconds, the room was filled with doctors and nurses, all working feverishly to stabilize Lucas. But their efforts seemed in vain. Lucas's vital signs were fading, and the shadows of death were beginning to close in on him. The chief resident, a man with grey hair and a grave expression, looked at the monitor screen with a mixture of resignation and sadness. "He's not responding," he murmured, almost to himself, but loud enough for the others to hear. One of the young doctors beside him tried again with chest compressions, but there was still no sign of life. "Lucas," he whispered, without much hope in his voice, as the seconds seemed to drag on eternally. The doctor finally stopped, resigned, and looked at the others in the room with weary eyes. "I'm sorry. We've done everything we could." The words hung in the air, like a final sentence, and the atmosphere grew even heavier, if that was possible. The machines were turned off one by one. The constant beeping ceased, leaving a tomb-like silence that chilled the hearts of all present. But Rocky, who had watched everything with desperate attention, did not accept what was happening. With a swift movement, Rocky placed himself between Lucas and the doctors, growling low, his whole body radiating a mixture of defiance and anguish. His instincts told him something was wrong, that his owner could not be dead. The doctors, startled, took a step back, looking at each other uncertainly. "Rocky, there's nothing more we can do," said one of the doctors, trying to approach, but the dog growled more intensely, baring his teeth. His message was clear. They would not take Lucas. Not yet. The officers at the door approached at the sound of the commotion, but none had the courage to try to move the dog. They knew Rocky. They knew of his loyalty and his ability to protect Lucas at any cost. So no one wanted to be the one to face that fury, that devotion made flesh. As the tension mounted in the room, Rocky stood firm, his eyes fixed on Lucas's body, searching for any sign, any hint of life. His heart was beating with a painful intensity, each second a blow that echoed in his chest. He did not understand why the humans did not see what he felt so clearly. And then, in that instant of utter despair, something unexpected happened. Lucas, who had been motionless and unresponsive, suddenly made a sound, a small gasp that almost went unnoticed. Rocky pricked up his ears, his whole body tense, and moved closer to Lucas's face. "Lucas?" the dog seemed to ask, his eyes searching for an answer. A second later, Lucas coughed weakly, and his chest rose slightly with a new breath. Rocky felt it before anyone else. With a soft bark, full of hope, he began to lick his master's face, as if to make sure that what was happening was real. The doctors, who had been in shock, reacted immediately. "He's alive!" exclaimed one, rushing to the bedside to check his vital signs. The room was filled with activity again, but this time with a different energy, charged with astonishment and renewed hope. Lucas, with his eyes still closed, seemed to struggle to stay on the surface of consciousness, as if a part of him knew he was not alone, that someone needed him. His hand, weak but moving, fumbled in the darkness until it found Rocky's warm fur. The dog, sensing the contact, let out a small whimper of relief, staying as close as possible, as if afraid that his master would disappear back into the darkness. The doctors worked with renewed vigor, stabilizing Lucas, while Rocky remained by his side, not leaving for a moment. News of Lucas's miraculous recovery spread quickly through the hospital, and the atmosphere changed from despair to astonishment and gratitude. The next morning, as the first rays of sunshine filtered through the window of the room, Rocky was still vigilantly at his master's side. Lucas, though still weak, slowly opened his eyes. His vision was blurry, but the first thing he saw was Rocky's anxious face, his eyes filled with a loyalty that could not be broken. "Rocky," murmured Lucas, his voice barely a whisper but full of recognition. The dog barked softly, moving closer, and with a tenderness that only such a devoted being could possess, licked Lucas's hand, as if to say that everything was okay, that they had both come back from the darkness together. Dawn slowly entered through the window of the hospital room, bathing everything in a golden and warm light. For Lucas, each ray of sunshine represented a new challenge and, at the same time, an opportunity. After having been on the verge of death, he now faced a long and arduous road to recovery. His body, weak and exhausted from surgery and coma, had to relearn the basics, to move, to walk, even to hold a spoon. However, in the midst of all the pain and frustration, Lucas was not alone. At his side, like a loyal and constant shadow, was Rocky. The German Shepherd had been there from the moment Lucas opened his eyes after the operation, and he had not left his side for a single moment. Rocky's presence was more than just company. It was a beacon of hope and a reminder of what it meant to be alive. Lucas could feel Rocky's energy every time the dog came near him, his warm breath, the softness of his fur, the unwavering attention in those dark eyes that did not miss a detail of his owner's every move. The first few weeks of therapy were the hardest. Every exercise, no matter how small, felt like an impossible mountain to climb. The simple act of lifting a leg required all the willpower Lucas could muster. The pain was constant, a sharp stabbing in his shoulder and throughout his weakened body. Sometimes, when the pain became unbearable, Lucas would close his eyes and feel like he could give up. But then Rocky, with an almost supernatural intuition, would appear beside him, resting his head on Lucas's leg, as if reminding him that he was not alone, that together they could overcome any obstacle. The dog actively participated in each physiotherapy session. While therapists guided Lucas through the movements, Rocky watched closely, his eyes following every action, every effort. During rest periods, the dog would come closer to lick Lucas's hand, his way of offering comfort and support. And when Lucas made a small breakthrough, Rocky would react with renewed energy, as if he understood the importance of every little victory. As the days turned into weeks, Lucas began to notice subtle changes. At first, they were barely perceptible. Greater flexibility in his fingers, less pain when moving his arm, the ability to sit up without feeling like he was going to pass out. But over time, those small achievements added up, and Lucas began to regain strength and mobility. Each step forward was marked by perseverance and dedication, not only from him, but also from Rocky, who never let him fall into despair. The bond between man and dog grew stronger with each passing day. It was no longer simply a relationship between an owner and his pet, but a deeper connection, born of the shared experience of suffering and recovery. Lucas began to realize how much he depended on Rocky, not only for everyday tasks, but to keep his spirits up. The simple act of seeing Rocky moving around him, always alert and attentive, gave Lucas the strength to carry on, to face the day with determination. The nights were often the hardest. When the hospital was plunged into silence and darkness, Lucas was left alone with his thoughts and his fears. The trauma of what had happened sometimes flooded him. The memories of the shooting, the chase, the pain. At those times, Rocky would approach, settling down next to the bed, his warm body providing a silent comfort. Lucas found solace in contact with his faithful friend, in the steady rhythm of his breathing, which anchored him to the present and reminded him that the worst was over. In time, Lucas began to walk again, first with help, then more independently. Each step was a battle won, proof that life, despite its hardest blows, had the capacity to renew itself. Rocky stayed by his side, watching closely, ready to offer support if Lucas needed it. They walked together through the hospital corridors, Lucas with cautious but determined steps, and Rocky by his side, calm but alert, as if he knew that his presence was what kept Lucas on his feet. Daily routine took on new meaning. Activities that were once insignificant now became milestones. Being able to get out of bed without help, being able to hold a cup of coffee without his hand shaking, being able to feed himself. Every small step forward was celebrated in silence, with Rocky always there, as a silent witness to Lucas's progress. News of Lucas's miraculous return quickly spread like wildfire. Headlines in local newspapers began to fill the streets. The man who came back from the dead. The miracle of life. The Lazarus effect in the 21st century. What began as a rumor in the hospital corridors became a story that captured the attention of the entire country. Journalists and reporters from major media outlets flocked to get details about the man who, after being pronounced dead, had come back to life. The doctors, still amazed by what they had witnessed, began to speak cautiously of the so-called Lazarus effect, an extremely rare phenomenon in medicine where a person is declared clinically dead, only to unexpectedly return to life. For specialists, Lucas' case represented not only a medical enigma, but also a powerful reminder of the limits and mysteries of science. Lucas, still recovering, unwittingly became a symbol of hope, of the human capacity to resist even in the face of the most extreme adversity. His story inspired millions of people who saw in him the embodiment of the struggle for life. The press was quick to highlight the crucial role of Rocky, the loyal German shepherd who had remained by his side, protecting him even when everyone else thought all was lost. Images of Rocky, sitting faithfully by Lucas's bed, his gaze penetrating and watchful, became an icon of loyalty and unconditional love. Social media was flooded with messages, some sharing personal stories of pets that had played a vital role in their lives, while others simply expressed their admiration for the unbreakable bond between Lucas and his dog. However, for Lucas, all this media attention was overwhelming. From the moment he regained consciousness, he had been surrounded not only by doctors and nurses, but also by cameras and microphones. Every step he took, every word he uttered, was analyzed, reported, and discussed. The pressure of being seen as a symbol, of representing something bigger than his own existence, weighed heavily on him. In the long hours of the night, when the hospital was plunged into silence and gloom, Lucas reflected on what had happened to him. He knew he had escaped the clutches of death by more than just a medical accident. He felt in the depths of his being that his return was intimately linked to Rocky's constant presence. The dog had been his anchor, the silent force that had kept him connected to the world of the living. Every time Lucas looked at Rocky, he felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. He knew that without his faithful companion, his story would have had a very different ending. Rocky had not only been there during the moments of crisis, but he was also there now, helping him navigate the complicated reality of being a public figure. While society saw him as a living miracle, Lucas saw Rocky as the true hero of this story. Lucas's life had changed irrevocably since the day he returned from the gates of death. What was once a normal daily routine was now imbued with a new sense of appreciation and gratitude. Each sunrise, each small detail of life had become a reminder of the fragility and beauty of existence. With Rocky by his side, Lucas had learned to value what he might once have taken for granted. At first, the thought of returning to his normal life seemed overwhelming. The pressure of being seen as a symbol of hope and the constant media attention had made Lucas feel as if he were living in a gilded cage, But in time, he began to find a balance. Lucas realized that his story had the power to inspire, and that responsibility, instead of overwhelming him, began to give him a renewed purpose. Together with Rocky, Lucas began to reintegrate into his community. The first steps were slow and calculated, still remembering the intensity of the pain and the struggle to survive. However, with each step, a new inner strength was built, founded on the experience shared with his loyal companion. The walks in the park, which were once simple moments of tranquility, were now encounters with neighbors and friends who stopped to greet him, to express their admiration and, in many cases, to ask for advice. Lucas, with a humility that characterized him, listened attentively to the stories of those who approached him, knowing that his own experience had touched the lives of many. But he always steered the conversation towards Rocky, highlighting how his faithful dog had been the key to his recovery, the anchor that kept him steady in the darkest of times. The relationship between Lucas and Rocky had deepened in ways that only those who have been through such extreme trials could understand. It was no longer just the bond between a man and his dog. It was an alliance forged in adversity, in the mutual need to survive and protect each other. Rocky had become much more than a work partner. He was a friend, a guardian, and, in many ways, a reflection of Lucas's own indomitable spirit. In time, Lucas began to share his story more openly. He was invited to schools, community centers, and local events to talk about his experience. Rocky always accompanied him, his silent but powerful presence adding an extra layer of meaning to every word Lucas uttered. The children watched in awe, and the adults listened with tears in their eyes, moved by the story of a life that, against all odds, had clung to hope. Lucas always emphasized the importance of loyalty, not only Rocky's to him, but also the loyalty he himself felt towards those around him. He talked about how unpredictable life is, how in an instant everything can change, and how, at those times, the only thing that really matters are the bonds we have forged with those we love. His words resonated deeply with people, and each event ended with long lines of people who wanted to thank him for sharing his story, and perhaps, in their own hearts, find some of the strength that Lucas and Rocky had demonstrated. Meanwhile, Lucas and Rocky's daily routine in their work with the police slowly resumed. However, things were not the same as before. They had learned to be more cautious, to value safety above all else. The patrols that were once carried out without a second thought were now approached with a new perspective. Every emergency call, every risky situation was treated with the respect and seriousness that only those who have seen death up close can understand. Rocky, for his part, continued to fulfill his role with the same dedication and bravery that had always characterized him. But Lucas could notice a change in him too. It was as if the dog, after having gone through that near-death experience, had developed an even sharper instinct, a special sensitivity to detect danger before it manifested itself. Together, they were a stronger team, more united by the invisible scars they carried within. The nights were the times when Lucas reflected most deeply on all that he had been through. Sitting in his small backyard with Rocky by his side, looking up at the stars that shone over the city, he thought about how his life had changed. It wasn't just the physical pain he had endured, but the profound lessons about life, death, and what it really means to be human. He knew he would never be the same person he was before the incident, but instead of lamenting it, he accepted it with gratitude. The bond between Lucas and Rocky had become more than just a friendship. It was a life force that drove them both to move forward, to face each new day with courage and determination. And while the future remained uncertain, Lucas knew that with Rocky by his side, there was no challenge they could not overcome together. And so, life went on, with its ups and downs, with its moments of joy and its challenges. But in every moment, however simple or complicated, Lucas found a new reason to be grateful, to move forward, knowing that in this uncertain world, Rocky's loyalty and unconditional love were what truly gave his life meaning. Lucas and Rocky's story is a moving journey of resilience, loyalty, and unconditional love. Throughout the story, we are presented with a vivid portrait of the struggle for life, not only in physical terms, but also emotional and spiritual. Lucas's transformation from a man on the verge of death to becoming a symbol of hope is a deeply human journey that resonates with the strength of the spirit in the face of adversity. What really strikes you about this story is the relationship between Lucas and his faithful companion, Rocky. The dog, more than just a service animal, becomes a fundamental pillar for Lucas's recovery. His unwavering loyalty and protective instinct are what ultimately bring Lucas back to the world of the living. It is a powerful reminder of how the bonds we form, especially with those closest to us, can be a source of strength in the darkest of times. The narrative also underscores the importance of appreciating every little moment of life, something Lucas learns as he struggles to regain his health and normalcy. In a world where we are often distracted by the superficial, the story invites us to reflect on what really matters: relationships, perseverance, and the ability to find hope even in the most difficult of times. Ultimately, the story of Lucas and Rocky teaches us that life, with all its uncertainties and challenges, is a gift to be cherished. The story reminds us that, despite the trials and tribulations, loyalty, love, and inner strength are the true sources of power that allow us to overcome any obstacle. If you found the journeys of the characters inspiring, like and comment to share your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more uplifting stories that highlight the power of human connection and kindness. Thanks for watching.